Hi everyone, and welcome to week 2 of our butterfly garden sew-along hosted by me. This week we are going to just make 4 blocks, and it's 4 of our flowers. So all of the tulips will make 1 large tulip, 2 ragged tulips, and 1 small tulip. Now throughout this video I will show you the traditional piecing for the large tulip and the ragged tulips. But for the small tulip, I've decided to show the foundation paper piecing that you have all so lovingly purchased from me. On the foundation paper piecing front, I have been made aware that some people are having problems printing that, so I am going to issue an email to all of those that have purchased the foundation papers with another link for you to download those from, because a few people are having trouble printing them. So without much further ado, grab your fabric, grab your beverage, come with me, and I'll show you how I do it. As I said before, we are going to start with the large tulip, and I have the pieces here, A, B, C, and D on the board. Now, once again, to make these tulips, we are just doing a lot of sew and flips, and we are going to start by placing our tiny A square on our D rectangles. And now we need 1 sew and flip to go up and to the left and the other one to go up and to the right. So to achieve that, I'll grab the 2 pieces of D here and I'll place 1 vertically so that I can get that angle there. And by placing the other one horizontally on the table in front of me, I can get the reverse angle. But it just makes sense to my brain to do it this way. And I did mention that in last week's video where I said I always put the corner that the sew and flip needs to go on in the top right. And even though these are rectangles that are the same size width as the square, that same principle applies. So once again, I am using my folded corner clipper, and we just have to line that up on our 2.5 inch measurement that we have here and slice that off before taking it to the machine and stitching our 1/4 inch. So we'll put the sew and flip on the top of both of these. I do believe we can do, well, I know that we can, but I'm not sure if I do it now. Put one of the sew and flips on the C rectangle, and I just do the upper right hand corner of that using the folded corner clipper. As you can see here, you don't always have to line it up perfectly. It's just about getting that diagonal and making sure you've got your 1/4 inch. What I do when I take these to the machine is, just like when I do draw the line and sew just to the right of that drawn line, I actually move my needle over by like 0.1 or 0.2 if you've got that functionality on your machine, and it does the same thing as sewing just to the right hand side of the line and allows for the take up of the cloth when we press these over. So I didn't do it at the same time, but I am just adding 1 of the A squares to our C rectangle. And with that done, on our skinny rectangles or our D rectangles, we'll press in towards that larger rectangle, and on this big C rectangle we will press out towards the sew and flip corners, and that allows us to nest the seams when we go to sew these together at the next step. So as I said before, and as you would have seen just then, on our smaller D strips, we pressed our seam allowance towards that actual print fabric, and on the larger rectangle we pressed up and out towards that sew and flip corner, and that allows us to nest this seam when we come to sew this one. So we're just going to sew the skinny strip on either side, making sure that we have our placement of our sew and flips correct. So it should create a little mountain range And then I do believe that I press these seam allowances open. Okay, so now we have our mountain range looking piece, for lack of a better term, and we just bring in our final 2 B squares that we had set aside earlier, and we place a sew and flip on the bottom edge of both of these pieces. We do go across the seam allowance here, so for those of you that are doing the foundation paper piecing, at the end of this video, as the small tulip is done exactly the same as this one, it's just a smaller size, I will show the FPP version, as these little corner triangles do come on as separate pieces. There was no way to do the pattern so that they were actually part of the whole because of the way we had to do those 2 peaks at the top of the tulip. So stay tuned to the end and I'll show you how to foundation paper piece this tulip. And once we add these on, we'll press out towards those sew and flips and our large tulip is done. Do the small tulip the exact same way, just make sure that you have all of the correct sizes cut. But as I said, at the end of the video, I will show you how to do the FPP version of this tulip, just so that we can work around those tricky little corners that we add on the bottom. After this, we'll move on to the ragged tulip, which is pretty much exactly the same as this one. See you then. So as per the pattern for this week, we do need to make 2 of the ragged tulips. And for that, on the board in front of me here, we continue with our lettering for our pieces because it's the same week. We have background pieces E and F, and our print fabric is G. So in my instance, that's that lovely red batik. For the E squares, we do need to have 12 of those, and I will be making both tulips throughout this video, so I do actually have all 6 of my strips in the red here. We need to put a sew and flip on both sides of the top of all of our G rectangles, and this week I'm just going to show the traditional method, which is in the pattern. And so to begin with that, we just need to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner on the wrong side of our background squares. Place that nice and neatly in the top right hand corner of our large G rectangle, and take that to the machine, and we're going to stitch just to the right of that drawn line. Please excuse the blurriness of this sewing machine footage here. I am still having trouble with my second camera. As I have explained before, the reason we stitch just to the right of our drawn line is to allow for the fabric that is taken up when we press this over and create our seam. So we are just going to check that that's all correct now. So when we fold this over, we're looking that all of our edges still line up. Our G rectangle is still a rectangle and everything is nice and even. We also need to check the back to make sure that we don't have any hangovers there before we remove those excess 2 layers by either using our rotary cutter, or in my instance here, I'm just bringing in a scissor. So I will continue putting all of the sew and flips on the other 5 G rectangles in that top right hand corner, and I'll meet you back once they're all sewn. and abracadabra alakazam and the magic of TV plus the fast forward button. Those are all sewn on now, and you'll notice that as per the pattern for the sew and flip that goes on the top right hand corner of our G rectangles, we are pressing that in towards the rectangle. When we put the one on the left hand side at this same edge, we will press that out towards the corner, and that allows, because we need to sew 3 of these together, it allows for all of our seams to nest once we are getting to that point. So I'll press all of these in towards the rectangle. I'll attach the sew and flip on the top left hand side, but following my rule of putting where the sew and flip goes on the top right hand side, I'll now place these pieces horizontally on the table in front of me, and that gives me the opposite angle without even having to think about it. Once I've got all of those done, we'll press that, as I said, out towards that corner, and I'll come back and talk to you again then. Now that we do have our sew and flips on the top of all of our G rectangles and they're all pressed in the right direction and making sure that we can have nesting seams, just set 2 of those aside, and we're going to sew 2 of these into sets of 2. So a total of 4 into 2 sets of 2, and you'll notice that because of the pressing that our seam allowances here will nest. Once we've done that, we'll press this seam allowance open, and then we'll attach the 3rd strip, and we'll have 2 sets of 3. Once again, pressing that seam open. And with both of those seams now done, and just exactly like our large tulip, we just need to add a sew and flip to the bottom corners of this ragged tulip. So we'll do this in the same way. Now, because the sew and flip is the same size as the strip, being 2.5 inches, we could have actually applied this before, but doing it at the end here just saves a little bit of bulk in those seams, as it will cross over where the 2 pieces do come together. So I'm just once again using my folded corner clipper tool to slice that off before I take it to the machine and stitch that 1/4 inch. So we need to do this on both of the bottom corners of both of our ragged tulips, and then we'll press out towards these sew and flips, and the ragged tulips, make sure you make 2, are both done. Okay, so for those of you doing the FPP, I have numbered some of the pieces incorrectly, so you'll just see me here swapping the 1 and the 2 over on these outside leaves, and that just allows for our nesting when we come to sew these together so that we don't have bulky seams. We're going to take all of that and cut each of our shapes out. Noting that we do have those 2 little triangles that are all out there on their own, but don't worry, it'll all become clear and it all comes out in the wash. And I'm sure that any of you that have bought the foundation papers know full well how to foundation paper piece. And just as a rough overview, I get a rough size from the piece that I'm needing to cover, and then I cut that piece of fabric accordingly. I then normally glue this if the piece is large enough so that it holds it in place while we're doing the rest. I'm going to use my little metal rule there to fold in between our A1 and A2 lines. I'm then going to place the background fabric right side down, so the wrong side facing us. As with foundation paper piecing, you are doing it from the back, which is why the images are reversed. Once we've folded along that line with our metal rule, I'm going to take my add-a-quarter ruler. You can use a standard quilting ruler. You just need something with that 1/4 inch mark or 1/8, depending on how big you cut your seam allowances. I'll show you here that if we have this 1/4 inch line on my 1x12 inch creative grids, or the 1/4 inch line on any other quilting ruler, you can just line that up against that fold and slice your excess fabric off. I do prefer to use the add-a-quarter, and I'll put links in the description box below to all of these tools for you to purchase. The add-a-quarter has a ledge on it that just sits along that fold of the paper and lets you cut your perfect 1/4 inch seam. We then need to line up our piece of fabric underneath that. I'm just going to cut a really rough piece here. Do not do what I do. I have enough fabric that I can waste it. You should be as frugal as possible. We're going to line that seam allowance up and take that over to the machine, opening our paper back up, and we're going to stitch along that printed line. We're going to do this to get all of our foundation papers made, remembering to reverse the order or change the order of 1 and 2 on pieces B and C. And then I'll meet you back when it comes to doing those bottom 2 corners. Please enjoy. Okay, I'm back sooner than I thought, because as I go, I do trim these down to their final size by lining that 1/4 inch line up again on the actual, what would be the sew line if you were to do it the traditional way. I just always trim these down first, as when I come to sew these together, I actually pull the papers off before sewing my sections together, as I trust my 1/4 inch seam with how I'm trimming this away now. So once you get each piece made for A, B and C, and even D and E, just trim them all down using that 1/4 inch as your guide, and make sure that if you have those angled corners and the engineered corners are on these pieces, that you trim those little dog ears off first, as that will come in real handy when we go to add our D and E triangles.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Rather than fast forwarding through all that footage, I do have A, B and C now done, and I'm just getting ready to do those D and E triangles. And as I said to you before, when we do trim these down, it is important that we do trim off those little engineered corners, as when we come to put all of these together, those little corners really make it very easy for us to line everything up. So I'll just get these all trimmed down and be back to speak to you then. As I said before, for foundation paper piecing, you are working backwards and on the wrong side of the fabric, so everything is reversed. And I also, before I sew my sections together, I take the papers off. I trust that my 1/4 inch is exact. And you'll notice here that we have those little engineered corners on our pieces B and C, and they line up nice and perfectly on the end there. And if you change the order of piecing that you did on B and C, the 1 and the 2 the other way around, you'll get this little seam here to nest. So we need to line up our little engineered corner and our nesting seam there, and so on B and then C. I'm going to take those to the pressing mat and press both of those open. Now for our triangles on the bottom, D and E, once again, they have those engineered corners. Line those up nice and snugly, stitch both of those on, and then press out towards the corner. Okay, folks, that's it for another week, and go out there and make your 4 tulips. Now, week 3 is going to be a big one, but bear with me. As I've said in the past, and I will continue to say, this is not a race. There is no behind. If you don't get things done, it doesn't matter. You're only competing with yourself on this. I have to put a video out each week to please the YouTube gods, but you don't need to actually complete the assignments in that week. These videos will be here forever. If you've liked what you've seen today, please leave me a comment, like the video, share it with a friend, subscribe if you haven't already done so. It's free and really helps me out. But most importantly, tickle that little bell icon to be notified of all my upcoming releases. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.